And I have with me wonderful Anna Sekou, who is a trainer as well, a coach, and an amazing person. And we discovered that we have many interests in common and many values in common that connect us both. Like we're very passionate about helping people, training people, empowering people. And that is why we chose the path that we chose. And today, Anna and I will discuss about charisma. Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Georgina. Yes, so yeah, I'm also a trainer and business coach. I focus on communication and leadership. And my passion on this topic, on charisma specifically, goes beyond, I think, business needs. I think it's a subject that is very interesting for all of us. Charisma is one of those qualities that can make our life much more happy if we develop it, and I think it's a conversation worth having. So I hope you tune in and enjoy it with us, as we will.
So let's start with the definition of charisma. What do you think, Anna, according to you, of course, what do you think charisma is?
So for me, the best way I would define charisma, it's a generous gift of connection. I like to think, for everything that I study, I like to go a little bit back to the roots and understand how the concepts originally started, the etymology. In the case of charisma, it has a lot to do with this idea of divine gift. So it's in the original concept is a gift given by God, but it's a gift that is meant to be shared. So it's a gift that is meant to improve the life of the person who has it, but maybe most importantly, it's improving the life of everyone around that person. So that's something that for me is very central to the definition, and that's why I think it's such an important topic today, because I guess that we have veered a little bit off from that. So I wouldn't say that this is the mainstream definition of charisma, but I think it's a definition that needs to be revived, and we need to talk about this, because otherwise we might try to assess charisma on a basis that it's much more individualistic and much more egocentric, let's say. Whereas I think that the main point of charisma is to bring light into our lives, and with that to share that light and make everyone else around us feel a little bit more seen, a little bit more clear. So to shed light a little bit around us as well. This is my.
Yes,
What do you think of charisma when you think of charisma?
I said, and I think it's worth mentioning here that charisma comes from the word charis, which is grace. So it is basically it talks about our personal grace, let's say,
Exactly.
something that personally, let's say, alluring to others. So we have something, a gift from God, which is very alluring and attractive to others. And also charisma. So charis is grace. Charisma, or charisma in Greek, is basically something that is given as a gift, as you very rightly. I think that charisma is never about one person. So it's always about something that we experience ourselves. So it's an awareness that we have, a mix of many different things that we have, that we out to the world and that we share with others. Otherwise, charisma is not something that is a gift, which is it defeats the purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that subject of grace, which is also a word that I find very interesting, I think that it's worth thinking a little bit about the three graces. So I think when we explore this idea of the three graces, the caritas, no? Of course, you're gonna correct me, because I'm sure I'm not gonna pronounce this as well, since you are Greek. So I hope you give me the correct pronunciation. But I think that when we explore what are the attributes that were connected with these three graces, we can find a lot of meaning regarding charisma. So if we think a little bit about that, these three graces, so it's one of them represents brightness, so light, that spark, that beauty as well, because it's connected, no? So light, beauty. One of them represents happiness, which has a lot to do with humor, with something that is contagious, because obviously we know that our emotions influence those around us. So happiness has a lot to do with charisma. Feeling abundant, feeling graced by life has a lot to do with charisma. And then the third one is connected to blossoming. So it's also something to do with the natural evolution and the natural beauty that life bestows when things develop and actually get to blossom. So I think those three graces also give us a nice ground to start to think, okay, so what are the elements inside of me that are actually allowing me to transmit that enthusiasm, to transmit that vibration, because I think it's also a question of a certain vibration. Charisma has a lot to do, I think, with our magnetic power. So how we can create a field around us and how we can make other people feel in that space that we create, no? And that we share then with them. So I think that these three concepts, light, happiness and blossoming, I think they are very, very important, and a way for us to understand a little bit what are we trying to get at, because charisma is, it's, as you said, it takes many forms. In the original definition there are many different kinds of charisma, no? So one charisma would be the art of healing, that was considered a charisma, no? So it's a let's say some kind of characteristic that heals the community or that brings positive change, evolution to the community, that enriches the community, and that is in some way innate. So this is interesting, because I think that this is a big question. Can charisma be developed, or is charisma something that we are born with, no? And I think there is a little bit of both there. So that's why I think at the end we can find many different kinds of charisma, because each of us have some kind of seed that then can be watered, or it can be, a little bit forgotten, but we can always, like a seed, it's kind of like eternal. So at some point when we start watering it, it can still, develop life. So in that sense, I think that we can see that some people's charisma is more based on warmth, some people charisma is more based on competence, other for others it can be something to do with the presence they have. I think those are the three pillars of charisma in my idea, or how I kind of approach it when I try to explain it in the classroom. I try to make this distinction between our presence, which is something that I think that all kinds of charisma is, has to be a little bit based on that. But then there are two roads. You can either work on presence and warmth with a dose of competence, or you can work on presence and competence with a dose of warmth. But that's, it creates many different mixes, and I think that's the beauty of it, that we don't all have to develop as one specific kind of charisma. We have some natural tendencies. That's why I think it's also a little bit innate, that there are some natural tendencies that make it easier for us to feel more connected to that warmth aspect or to that competence aspect, which has a lot to do also with masculine and feminine. It's something we can get into also later. I think it's interesting, no? Because it's
yeah, of course. I think blossoming is, but from what you mentioned, blossoming, what comes to mind is, I think for a person to really blossom, you need to know your vision, you need to know your values, you need to be authentic to yourself, and to others, of course, but most importantly to yourself. Like, you cannot, for example, have different thoughts and different actions. They need to be aligned.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think blossoming is also about being very much aware about yourself. Who am I? What are my strengths? What are my development areas? What are my weaknesses? Um, what are my experiences? What kind of wisdom have I acquired through all these experiences? What kind of choices do I make? So I think in order for a person to blossom and to exclude and to exude this
Mhm.
light, you need to be very much aware and very much authentic and aligned with who you really are, your core self. And and of course it is a mix of both. I think it has to do with charisma, has to do with traits that we were born with, but also traits that we develop along the way. And I think that our experiences are very important in shaping who we are. One of my psychologists in the past, a psychotherapist, a wonderful person, he kept on saying, we always have this, let's say, fight, not fight, a debate in the therapy room, because he was always saying, we are our experiences. And I thought that that was a very, let's say, reductivistic point of view, as if it reduces humans to something that is just the experiences. I think, and I always kept on saying, no, but we're far more than our experiences. We're not only our experiences, we're our personality, our choices, our values. For me, it's a very multidimensional construct.
Mm-hmm.
So in order for us to blossom, we really need to have awareness, authenticity, and yeah, I think you need to have some sort of a path in order for charisma to develop. Otherwise, uh, otherwise you might get lost along the way, and we all get lost along the way. It's part of growing up, part of growing wiser. But I think that we need some sort of a roadmap in order to develop our charisma. Do you agree with that?
I don't know. I see why you say that, and I do agree with it in a way. But then I also think, for example, of children. No, so there is a mental part to it. So when you talk about your values, your vision, there is something that has to do with our concepts. No, the thought that populate our mind, and in that sense, yes, absolutely, I think we need to have clarity, and when we have clarity, we start seeing our path, and we start walking our path. But I also think there is another part that has to do with embodying it. So as you said, there needs to be integrity, no? So between your thought, your words, and your actions. And that's maybe what comes down to experiences, like your psychotherapists were saying. Like, you can have a path but not actually embody that path, and then it stays in a very mental plane. And if you think about children, for example, that they don't really like think about all those things, they do have values, they embody them, though they don't know what those values are, they just embody them by living, no? And you can see a lot of charisma in certain kids because they are expressing themselves with a lot of authenticity. They might not have it's not the time yet to maybe focus on one specific thing, but there is a magnetic presence to them. I'm not saying all children, so I'm talking about, there are some people that have a more visible charisma, a more developed charisma, and I think that has to do maybe with the way they grew, with the experiences they had, and also sometimes just with the openness they have, because charisma has a lot to do also with communication. So someone can have an extreme level of competence, but it's not showing, no? So charisma has also, it's the inside, but it's also the outside, no? In Spanish we say, no solo hay que serlo, hay que parecerlo, which means you don't always have, you don't only have to be it, you have to seem it, or you have to look it, no? So it's both in and out. Charisma kind of bridges the gap, no, between your inner and your outer expression. So yes, I think that we need to have a path, but I think that there is also something that comes before that, and maybe that has a little bit to do with our presence, that it's not so it's not really on the mental plane, it's more on a vibrational plane, and I think that the problem is that when we focus too much on the mental plane, sometimes the vibrational plane can be hindered by that. So there is this analysis paralysis as well. No? So I guess we share that in common because of the job we chose. We tend to analyze things a lot. This sometimes can prevent us to be in the present. And as I said, presence, so our ability to be in the present, to be in our own body, is one of the, I would say, the first stone of charisma. So there is this trade-off, no, a little bit between our ability to be self-aware, but then to the extreme it can become self-consciousness when you are only thinking about how you're manifesting, how you are expressing yourself, what is another person thinking of you, is my tone right, is my body posture right, like all of these things can actually come in the way, no, of you being free and being able to express that presence flawlessly, no? So what do you think?
Yes, very good points. You really got me thinking now. Because you're right. People who are thinkers tend to get lost in their thoughts and overthinking. We know that overthinking can indeed lead to paralysis, and so does perfectionism. It can lead to paralysis and procrastination. And I think embodying, as you said very rightly, is not a mental thing. It's about being in the present, being in the now, being grateful. I think gratefulness is also very important in charisma, because I think the people who are very charismatic are, let's. I'm really thinking about it now as we speak in terms of a time continuum. I would say that charismatic people are very much focused in the now and in the future as well. They're not so consumed by the past. Um, Whereas overthinking may sometimes is correlated with thinking with the past, being ruminating about the past. What did I do well? What did I do wrong? Regretting, and overthinking basically things that you didn't do or that you should have done differently. And this is what there's a very nice expression by a psychoanalyst, Karen Horney, and she was saying the tyranny of shoulds.
The
That we
tip
all
of
tyranny,
so.
like I should do this, I should do that, like
Mhm.
this. And she talks about this idealized version of herself, which is basically who we aspire to be. And, you know, it's good to have this idealized version of ourselves as a compass, let's say, of our charismatic, ideal self. But we shouldn't like be so much attached to the shoulds. Let's say, shoulds always have a very low frequency because it's something that we don't really want to do. That's why it's called should.
Mhm.
And I think people who are very charismatic are very much focused in the now, very much focused in the present. How are we going to move forward? What kind of transformation, as you said, positive transformation will we bring here in this community? And yeah, and I think they're not consumed so much by regrets of, like, in my experience, charismatic people do not consume themselves a lot with regret. Like they even if they consume themselves at some point, they always think, okay, so how can I now convert my experience, my regret, into moving forward? How can I become a better person? The next, let's say, the next version of myself.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there is this point of abundance, no? So, as you said, charisma has to do with grace. Grace and being grateful is, it's in the same family, no? So there is this sensation also of I have enough. I have enough. I am plentiful, no? So this doesn't mean that I have enough in every area of my life, but in general, I take a compound and I feel, I have a lot to share, because that's the gift that keeps on giving, no? It's a sort of like infinite source charisma, in a way. When once you tap into it, it doesn't have an end, no? And and as you said as well, there is this capacity to be present and also to reflect. So I think that both things can cohabit. It's just that we need to choose the time and the place. Now, for example, like just before preparing this podcast, just before starting this conversation, I was thinking, okay, so what kind of earrings would look good in this scenario? I like this. I really like this fabric, which is full of flowers. I wanna, I have this bright dress or this bright, color. So I was thinking of how can I, improve my appearance right now to make the best impression I can in the moment. However, right now I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at my little image there and looking at how I'm presenting, So there is a time and a place. It's okay to think and strategize and think of things that I could improve or I would like to improve or I should improve, right? But then also that cannot take you away from, once you're engaging in an activity, once you're engaging in a conversation, which is where normally charisma takes place. It's a little bit, it doesn't make a lot of sense to think about someone alone in a forest and think whether or not they're charismatic. It kind of depends also on the people you have around. Charisma is a component, I think, of communication. in a way. So it's not something that you have on your own. It's something that you have, in relation, no? And once you're in that relation, are you able to focus outward? So that's what I say. For example, the people that are very shy that I work with, some people that have social anxiety, for example, a very interesting thought to have in that sense is, are you able to leave that worry for later? Like, can you focus right now and look into my eyes and think, how you can connect with me, think on the subject that we're talking about, put your focus outward, and that's not always like, then you will have time when you're alone to put your focus inward, to work on yourself, to work on your competence, to improve your skills, to improve your appearance, all of that. But it cannot consume you and take you away from that connection that we're having right now, no? So I think a lot, like in English, the word self-consciousness say a lot, no? So it's a synonym of shyness, no? Of being too conscious of yourself, which is a paradox, because in a way you need to be self-aware, you need to be conscious of yourself, of how you're presenting, of the appropriateness, of the situation. But when it's too much, then it becomes a hindrance, no? So it's also a question of balancing the inwards and outwards, of balancing working on yourself, but also being able to forget about yourself, because charisma, I think, has a lot to do with being there for the other person. So in order to be interesting, you need to be interested. You need to be interested in the conversation. You need to be interested in the other person. It has a lot to do with not having this need to shine, but rather creating the space for someone to shine in front of you and be able to, see the jewel that another person has in front of you, being curious, being, I think that's why some kids like naturally express it, because they are not so concerned about themselves. They are much more concerned about the world around them, at least in that moment. Then you can have other moments where your focus is more reflective and you're alone and you think about yourself. So I think those two things can should both take place, but it's just that there is a time and a place for each of them, right?
I agree. I agree 100%. And you know what is really interesting? I was also thinking of social anxiety when we were saying these things, and how these people tend to be so consumed with how did they come across other people, what do others think of them, you know. And the other thing that I was also thinking is that it's very interesting because in our brain there we have different parts being responsible for different things. Okay, and we have the upfront prefrontal cortex. Is it the upfront? I think it is. Which is basically responsible about self-monitoring and being conscious about the things that we say and the things that we do, and evaluating about whether the things that we do are right or wrong. And this part of the brain can be very limiting when it comes to taking action, because it is always thinking, am I doing some, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? It's a lot of self-monitoring, a lot of self-consciousnness. So very much consumed with the I, me. Whereas we have the medial prefrontal cortex, I think it is, or something, medial cortex. I don't remember the exact terminology, but that part of the brain is very much activated. For example, when we listen to music,
Mm-hmm.
and what happens is, at that moment, the self-conscious and self-monitoring part of the brain shuts down, and we're really in the moment when we listen to music. We're in the moment. We're in the flow. And we're very emotional, so it's the emotional part of the brain being activated. So I think charismatic people tend to operate a lot from that part of the brain. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's more interested in being in the flow and helping others and inspiring others and influencing others, rather than being consumed in the I and what did I do well, what did I do wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, before we're talking about these three pillars, no? So presence, warmth, and competence. And I put them in that order because I think there is a certain hierarchy, So as in a pyramid, it doesn't mean that the base is more important than the tip, or that the tip is more important than the base, but the base comes first and then comes the tip, no? So they're both equally important. The base is presence, and presence has a lot to do with the reptile part of our brain, so our ancient brain. It has a lot to do with the question that part of the brain asks. So if we have, the brain, that would be now the back part of our brain. This part of the brain asks the question, do I trust what I'm looking at, or do I distrust? Am I safe? So that part of the brain is concerned with safety, no? So our presence has a lot to do with that sensation that we create on others. Am I trustworthy? Am I a trustworthy person? Then you have the limbic part of the brain, which asks the question, do I like what I'm seeing, or do I dislike what I'm seeing? This has a lot to do with emotions. No? So as you were saying, oh, I have a mosquito here. As you were saying, it's very important because this has to do with pleasantness. That's why warmth would be the second one. No? So am I someone who is pleasant to be around? And this has a lot to do with the concern of, are people feeling comfortable in my presence? Am I someone who transmits this sense of benevolence, that I want the best for people around me? Of course, it connects to trust, but it's something else, right? So you can someone can be trustworthy but unpleasant at the same time, right? So it's presence, it's warmth, and then it's competence. So am I useful or am I not useful? That the prefrontal cortex, no? So that part of the brain who is evaluating whether something matters in this particular moment, what is the significance, how useful this information is or this person is in this particular context, no? And for this, I think that there is a sentence that it's not clear who said it. Something is Roosevelt, but it's not so clear. That is, it says, no one will care how much you know until they know how much you care. So competence is very important. It might be the tip of the pyramid, but it comes third. So first of all, am I trustworthy? Then am I pleasant? And then am I competent? And I think that's sometimes the pitfall of very intelligent people, that they believe that competence is all that matters. Whereas it's not. If you're not able to transmit, first of all, that you're trustworthy and then that you're pleasant, even if you have a lot of competence, that will not come across. And people will not, choose you to be the one who can be useful, even though you might be very useful, but you're not trustworthy or you're not pleasant. So that, I think that it's interesting to think about that hierarchy, because it doesn't say that, you know, competence, we shouldn't worry about that. I don't think so, because then you have a kind of a shallow charisma in a way. If it's not backed up by competence, in a way it can turn into arrogance, or it can turn into, manipulation. But you have to think about those two aspects first. Am I trustworthy, and am I pleasant? And in that sense, I think that we also transmit that a lot through body language. I think that's also an interesting topic to touch on. How do I develop charisma, and how can I show that I am someone who can bring an element of light into the conversation? And I think that presence has a lot to do with our ability to embody ourselves, when we are in ourselves, when we are inhabiting ourselves. So that's why we're talking about being in the present moment. When we are in our head, we're not really inhabiting ourselves. We are lost in our own body, but it's not, we are not inhabiting that center. And I think that is very important. So presence can be felt even without talking, even before a person starts talking, just by the way the person is carrying themselves, by the way they're walking into a room, by the way they're looking at you. That is enough to transmit presence. So that's why I think there is a part of communication that comes even before speaking, and it has a lot to do with how centered you are, and how much you are in your own body. And your eye contact can transmit that. Your ability also to recall details in conversations, this is something that I hear often, like with my clients, with people in my courses. They appreciate enormously when they have proof that you're absolutely there with them. So when you recall certain specific words that people are using, and this has a lot to do with listening more than speaking. So that's why I say presence, it's not really about expressing yourself, it's about emanating a certain attention. Presence has a lot to do with attention. That's why before I was saying being curious about who is in front of me, being interested, that has a lot to do with presence, right?
Absolutely. Being genuinely interested in the other person. I think that is something that is so that is missing so much in our communication these days. Like people are so anxious, and they don't have the time, they don't have the space to listen to other people. They don't really care. They're not genuinely interested. And I think even by listening to someone, even by providing this space that I'm here for you and I'm listening to you, I'm not distracted, I'm not bothered, I'm not distorting what you're saying, I'm just listening to you and trying to understand what you're trying to say. I think this is a very important aspect of charisma and charismatic leadership.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was also thinking, Anna, of some leaders that I've met who are very competent in their in terms of their expertise. They know so many things. They're very competent, very knowledgeable, but they have a lot of let's say they sometimes they may also have autistic traits, like being on the spectrum, let's say, of Asperger's, and that results in a lot of intelligence but like very low empathy, and they can be very insulting to others and very rude to their people. And I think charismatic people are always very respectful to others, and they care about others. They generally care. They're not there, to be harsh. They're not there to manipulate. They don't have another agenda. I mean, the agenda is okay. Let's let's transform together.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move forward together. Let's understand what is important here in this community, and you know let's go.
And that has a lot to do with warmth, right? So how can you influence the temperature of the relation? How able are you to make someone feel at ease, to create a space where another person feels comfortable enough to open up, to also show their authenticity? Because I think one of the characteristics of charismatic people is that in their presence we all feel uplifted. So that has a lot to do with generosity. Before we were talking about this abundant gift. So warmth is very important. And I think, in terms of those three pillars, warmth is probably the one that all of them need to be authentic. But I would say that presence and competence, there are things that you can do to, I don't like the expression fake it till you make it, but there are certain elements that you can integrate that will allow you to show more presence and more competence. I think warmth is the element that really needs to be absolutely authentic. Like there is nothing creepier or scarier than a fake smile or a fake compliment. So you have to be absolutely genuine. But at the same time, I think that that also can be learned, because I also know some people, in the spectrum who they might not have a natural empathy, but they are very intelligent and they understand what are the cues of empathy and what you should do, what you're expected to do to make someone feel comfortable. So you can learn those cues, and you can make sure that, okay, I've been talking for a while, but I'd like to know your opinion now, or I'd like to check on you, or just reading body language. For some people it's not. For some people, it just comes very natural to understand that when someone looks at you and they squint their eyes, it might mean that they're interested in what you're saying, or it might mean that they are scrutinizing. Maybe they're disagreeing with what you're thinking, but they're focusing, right? Uh, for other people, it might not be so obvious, but you can still learn that. There are many great courses on body language that can tell you what are the signs that people are showing certain emotions. So even if it doesn't come natural to you to just decode that, you can still learn to do it. So you can work on it, but then it has to be very authentic. Once you deploy your warmth, you can't be perceived as fake, because otherwise this is very, it puts everyone at edge, because it and it's very easy to see. The limbic system really is amazing in decoding even like microsecond of delay in some reactions that might make the person understand that you were not real when you said that, or that smile wasn't real. So this is something that, kindness, we all have our ways to show it. We don't all have to be, super extrovert or smiling all the time. You don't have to fake it, but it is important to consider that to make other people feel at ease is part of your responsibility, and is going to determine the success of your relationships. There is nothing that infuriates me more than people that don't mind making other people feel uncomfortable. So I can understand to certain particular moments, you can forgo that because you might be in a situation where, you know, that's not called for, because maybe the other person is being aggressive towards you, then of course you're not there to make them feel comfortable. But in normal situations, I think this is a duty that we have, you know, to make other people um, feel good around us, no? And I think I mean, strategically it doesn't make sense to not do it, but also, like, as a human, this is, I think, one of the biggest compliments you can say to someone is, oh, this person is very humane, this is a humane person, no? Which says a lot, because we are all humans, so in theory we should all be humane, but we're not. This is a compliment that we give to specific people that take great care of, you know, of making sure that their presence is uplifting to others, and that they bring a little bit of positivity into someone's life. So I think that's something that is an innate ability of all humans, but somehow, I don't know if it's, you know, this time of the, you know, of the world that we're living in, I don't know what it is, but certainly it's not so common to say that someone is very humane, unfortunately, you know.
And
And
sorry,
no, no, go
sorry.
ahead, go ahead.
I was thinking, I saw this reel the other day talking about likability and how important it is, you know, in how people see us and perceive us and trust us. And I think likability is also a very important component in charismatic people. So they have an element of being likable, you know, and they're also extroverted. Most of them, charismatic people. Don't you agree with that?
uh, I would say there are different kinds of charisma. That's the beauty of it. So I think extroverted people have uh, are more likely to develop charisma, because I think they are more likely to have had a lot of interactions, and those are teachings. No, so you learn through interactions. You learn what works. You learn to understand how to communicate better the more you do it. And extrovert people are more likely to put themselves out there much more. So in that sense, yes, statistically, it's more likely that they develop charisma. But I think it's about that exposure that they put themselves into. Because then I also saw, like, other kinds of charisma that are much more quiet, and those person are much more introvert, but you see that they have a great presence, like they're there, they might not be speaking, but they are absolutely there, very curious, very focused. They are also kind, so you have that warmth, and they might be super competent as well. So it's, I don't think it's something inaccessible for introverts. I think that you express charisma in a different way, but as an introvert, I think the question is, do put yourself out there, because if you don't, you're just not likely to learn those skills, you know. So I think I wouldn't I also I want to encourage everyone to develop their charisma. I think it's something that is accessible to all of us. And many people, I think, are actually ambiverts, so neither extroverts nor introverts. So they, it depends on the person, it depends on the setting. They might feel comfortable in a, you know, two, around one person, so having a conversation between four eyes, and then they might shut up when they are, you know, in larger groups. So I think I consider myself an ambivert. I can, right now I feel very comfortable, and I'm, you know, I can look like an extrovert, but I know that in some settings I'm not. I was in a party the other day, I didn't know anyone, and I was not really interacting that much. I was fine, I was not uncomfortable, but it just doesn't come up to me to be the center of attention. I feel uncomfortable, like, you know, having everyone looking at me if it's not people that I know. So, you know, I would say that extroverts have um, a higher chance of developing because of exposure. What do you think?
Um, you know, I think there's a lot of confusion between extroversion and, I mean, many people confuse extroversion with sociability, but it has nothing to do with that. Like extroversion means that basically when I'm tired after, let's say, a hard day at work, I want to see my friends and be able to talk and socialize. And that's what an extrovert would do, whereas an introverted person would stay at home and relax and wind, might see a good movie. So it's
Mm-hmm.
basically, where do we derive from? And I think charismatic people, um, I'm not sure where they derive their energy from. I think the most probably they tend to be on the extroverted side, or maybe ambiverts as well. Um, but I wouldn't know for sure. What I do know is that I think when charismatic people are in the moment and are in a state of flow, uh, it doesn't really matter if they're, introverted or ambiverted or extroverted. Um, when they're in the flow, that's all that matters to them, and they are just so, caught up in the moment that it's like as if they're on a mission. You know, you see them so focused and so alert, and yeah, they're just doing what they're supposed to do, which is actually interesting because I think every charismatic person has a different, let's say, vision or agenda. But I agree entirely with what you said about presence. Of course, they need to be, to have a certain presence. For example, I've noticed that executives who have a powerful presence are much more attractive, much more successful in their corporate careers. They have a lot of influence and impact
Mm-hmm.
and warmth. Absolutely. I've seen, I've met leaders that were very good performance wise, but they were perceived as being cold by their people. And that was always a turn off for their people. It's something that would come up all the time in discussions, coaching conversations that we had about the specific leader.
Yeah.
Like they would say people like, "Oh, but she's so distant. She's so distant. Oh, but he's so cold. I'm trying to get through to them."
Yeah.
Warmth is very, very important.
Absolutely. If you think about it, having presence and having competence without having warmth, it's quite scary. You can think of a dictator. Now, a dictator can have a lot of presence, can have a lot of competence, but if you don't think that this person has your best interest in heart, actually, the fact that they have that much competence is actually scary because you don't know what their intentions are. You don't know if the person is going to bring positive into your life or if it's actually going to be a menace to you. So I think that's so important. And also, coming back to that point of understanding that it's part of our responsibility to be likable. I think right now there is, I think, a very dangerous discourse going on around the idea of, people should like you how you are. You should not be, trying to be likable. That's something that only people pleasers do, and it's not something. And I think that that is very crazy because we are social animals, and I think it's part of our responsibility to make it easier for the other person to understand what we're saying. It's like if I'm talking to my child, my son, he's 11, and if I start using words that are absolutely out of his ball game, first of all, he's not going to understand me, but also it's going to be quite an uncomfortable experience for him. It might humiliate him, it might belittle him. So the this idea that I don't need to, you know, help my communication by understanding where the person is and meeting them at their level, and this has to do with physical appearance. Like if right now I came here in my sport clothes, I could do that, but clearly it would be a different effect. And so that's why one of the charities is beauty, because beauty has a lot to do with being pleasant to someone around us. And I think this is also a part of responsibility. And I'm not saying that, I'm not talking only about external beauty, but clearly doing your best to externally be as pleasant as you can, being cleaned, being groomed, dressing in a way that it's appropriate. I think it's very important, and it's not being superficial. It's actually just mm, showing to others um, the respect you have for yourself as well. In a way, it's also a signal of of intelligence. So if you're not able to be appropriate in a certain context, if you don't understand what the cues are. So for example, now I see Gen Z, for example, has a lot of problems with dress code, with etiquette, with not understanding what are the appropriate words to use in a professional context. All of this is a problem, and when we counter that with the fact that, well, but people should, be free to dress how they are and to express themselves, and it's all about you and you and you. And if you understand that the way you dress is one of the masks that you can put on, it's not your identity. You don't have to identify with that. I can be dressed like this now, and in a little bit I can change completely my dress, because I'm gardening in the garden, and it would be completely crazy to do that dress like that. Now, so we are not what we choose to wear. We should be comfortable with or without makeup. We should be comfortable full of dirt or completely clean, but for others' sake we should be pleasant to them, no? And I think this today is a little bit going out of the window. If you think about how people, for example, dress in planes, no? When I was little, I remember
Right.
that everyone would take care, or if you go to, the theater, or you do it in a certain way, and it's for you, but it's also for others, because it's also a signal of, um, I say this to my son all the time, when he asks me, well, but why do I need to brush my hair? And I'm like, well, you need to signal to others that you're clean, because it's not very pleasant to be around someone that is not clean. And he says, yeah, but I had a shower, I am clean. Yeah, but you don't look it. So you need to be it and also look it. Like, both things are important. And it's not about being superficial, right? So that's why I'm saying charisma is not all about being beautiful. There needs to be competence, there needs to be presence, but that part of pleasantness, to be pleasant, has to do with beauty. And beauty has to do with how polite you are. So it's not only about external beauty, it's about internal beauty, how kind you are to others. This makes you beautiful, no? So I'm not trying to say that you have to bank it all on the aesthetics. Beauty has many, many forms, but for sure is something that we shouldn't disregard. And I think it's a bit of a pity when I see that it's very, like, there is one wave of thinking that is very self-centered. Like, I should dress for myself. I should, groom for myself. Why should I do it for others? Why not? Like, don't you want to be in relation with others? Like, why wouldn't you do it for others? That's a kind of generosity as well, no? So
Yeah.
I think,
I think, however, I think that in our times, there seems to be, and I think media has a very big part on that. There seems to be a lot of egocentrism, a lot of a lot of narcissism, a lot of self-absorption. People are very self-absorbed. They And I think the media is very much responsible for that, because they cultivate to people a fantasy of omnipotence, that you can do everything on your own, that you don't really need others. And if you see on ads, there is this impression that, if I'm by myself, if I'm my fantastic self, I can be great and super happy, which is very misleading. And of course, the condition is, as long as you buy the right products, you're going to be fine on your own. And I think, charismatic people are not self-absorbed. They are absorbed in the common good, in the common interests of the community. Because if they are self-absorbed, then they wouldn't really care about others as much, and they wouldn't be caring, they wouldn't be compassionate, they wouldn't be kind. The other day it was very shocking, actually. I was in a boat returning from an island, and there was a person sleeping, and this lady came by in order to throw away the garbage of the passengers, and he was sleeping, and then she accidentally woke him up because she didn't realize he was sleeping, and he became furious. He started shouting to her, "I can't believe I was sleeping. Didn't you notice that I was sleeping? Are you waking me up to actually ask me if I have garbage?" And he became furious. And I felt so, and she clearly, she was shocked, of course. And then she became very defensive. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see that you were sleeping." And I was thinking, how rude this behavior was, and how self-absorbed this behavior was, and how, talking about cues, how misattuned to cues. Like, it's exactly the opposite from charismatic leadership. It's basically making the other person feel, so little, belittling people as if they're not important, as if they don't matter, which is something that a charismatic leader would never do. A charismatic leader makes everyone feel important. And, the most, like, the first, so my first job was in L'Oreal, the corporation, in the marketing department. And I remember clearly the director that we had, who was the epitome of charismatic leader. He was so genuinely interested in other people. Like, he would call us and ask us, how are you? He come into my office, I don't see you very well today, talk to me, what is wrong, is there something happening in your life? He was so caring. And especially one day, it was a crazy day. We were preparing the presentation for the French people from the headquarters to come. We were going to present the results. Everybody was very anxious, you know. And my director at the time, because it was my first job, and I was a junior marketing assistant, I was a marketing assistant, and so the director that I had, she was very sad that day, and I don't know why. I think she had some family issues with her husband or something. And then he said, come to my office. And she was there for like an hour. And then she came out of the office and she was so happy. This guy, just was listening to her for an hour and, really cared about her and how she felt and why she was not in a good place that day. And I think that's exactly what charisma is, making other people feel important. And, there's when babies are born, Freud has this expression about babies. He was saying His Majesty the baby, because all babies are the focus of attention of all the family. Everybody's like, oh, the prince of the family, or the princess. And so this phase in which the baby thinks that he or she is so important is called the primary narcissism phase, okay, in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. And this primary narcissism phase, has some adaptive, of course, parts to it, and some maladaptive. For example, it's interesting because you feel so empowered and so important, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, you have a very distorted perception of that you're the center of the universe. And I think charismatic leaders, need to balance these two. You know what I mean? When
Yes.
are they actually feeling good and confident with themselves, as in the primary narcissistic phase, which is the constructive narcissism. So constructive narcissism is that I feel good about myself, I believe in myself, I believe in my abilities, I believe that I can do this, I believe that I can help people, move forward and develop and evolve. And the maladaptive narcissism, the destructive narcissism, is being grandiose, entitled, manipulating others, using other people to get to where I want to go. So I think charismatic people have some sort of balance in terms of narcissism. Like, sometimes they may they may go to the destructive narcissistic phase, but if they are healthy in terms of mental health, I mean, if they don't have a narcissistic disorder, they're not going to go to the other side. They're not going to become manipulative,
Mm.
or develop other people.
Yeah.
What do you?
Yeah, I like very much the concept of constructive narcissism. I never encountered it, and I think it's absolutely true. I don't know. Can you see me? Yeah. Oh
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Staying reconnected. I like it, and for me that ties to presence, because you need to have abundance, and you need to feel absolutely, you know, graced and enough. You need to feel enough for you to be interested in other people. You need to feel enough. So that, I would think that presence has to do with that constructive narcissism. Once you feel enough, though, that then there is a second phase, which is you need to focus outward. So is that it, like in the plane? No, first you put your mask, but then you need to help others. It's not that you put your mask and then you do nothing. No, so that would prevent you to become, you know, destructively narcissistic, because you're not thinking only about yourself. You do. That's the first step. You need to have presence. You need to feel enough, but then you're able to focus outwards, and also you have to assess your competence, and that also prevents you from becoming grandiose. Like, you need to have a realistic view of what are your capacities, and an assessment that it's true, because otherwise, instead of charisma, you have arrogance when it's not linked to competence, no. So I think that is very important. And on that subject, I know that we said that we're going to try to keep it under an hour, but I wouldn't want to finish it without talking about competence, because I do think it's at the top of that pyramid, and I think it's very important.
Say that, and we can continue our discussion to another podcast.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But let me just share with you one one element that I think, to me, has brought a lot of positive change into my life once I understood this, and I see with my courses that it's really, really important for people. So this comes from the South America, the Amazonian wisdom. So it's not something I'm making up. They have this, they use animals as archetypes, right? And the animal that is the archetype of personal power, so competence is personal power, is the jaguar. And I would like to share this with you because I think it can be very useful to understand, because sometimes we look for signs of competence in dominance, and there are two different things. Competence actually naturally brings dominance, because obviously when you're very competent, you do have control of a certain situation, but it's not the same, right? It's like dominance, I think it's a secondary effect of competence. But sometimes people, I see that they try to go for dominance, so the one who has the broader stance and the higher voice, and it's I think sometimes it becomes a little bit superficial. But what they say in the Amazonian tribes is that the jaguar represents personal power for different reasons. First of all, is the mindset. So the mindset of, I have no enemies. An enemy is someone that can actually destroy me. So sometimes we think as other people as enemies, whereas they're not. They're just, maybe they're people that are in competition with us. They might be people that are a little bit of an obstacle to us. They might be a little bit of a menace. But to have someone in your mind as an enemy, which I think that's where a lot of social anxiety comes from, that fear of the repercussions, no, of what I say and what I do. Maybe they're gonna use it to destroy me. I think this is the first thing that we need to really rethink, because we don't have enemies. We're not in a jungle, unless sometimes you are in a life or death situation, but that's the only time you can really categorize someone as an enemy. That's not mostly in our interactions, right? So first is the mindset, I have no enemies. Then the jaguar represents the wisdom of understanding limits. So our king is only king because there is a kingdom. So power has a lot to do with a container. That's why when you don't have limits, it's kind of like it's dispersed and you can't really accumulate any kind of power. So understanding limits has to do with knowing your path. As we were saying before, you have a path. You cannot be everything. You have certain capacities which are not everything. Understanding what is your domain of competence, and understanding what are the rules. So how do you ask people to behave when they are in your territory? What are the rules in your territory? You need to have that clear. But also understanding what are the rules when you leave your territory. So how, because if a king leaves their territory and they still think that they're king, they're going to get killed. So it's very important to understand how you need to change your behavior when you enter in someone else's territory. And this brings me to the third point, which is elegance. So if you think of the crown, for example, no, the standard of etiquette and elegance that you have to uphold when you have power is very high. You need to have a high standard for yourself. So that doesn't mean that you're never going to make a mistake, you're never going to say something inappropriate, but understanding limits and understanding how you need to change your behavior in different territories has a lot to do with elegance and being appropriate. And I think this is a very quick way in which some leaders can lose legitimacy when they lack elegance. When they're seen as inappropriate, this is it's a destroyer of personal power. So elegance is very important. Think of a jaguar, no? Think of a cat, how they walk, right? So and this brings me to the next point, which is mastery of time. So right now we're in the middle of a conversation. I tend to speak quickly because I'm an enthusiastic person. I'm quite fiery, but I do try to work on the pace, because For example, now, if I start speaking a little bit slower, if my hand movements are a little bit slower, my voice naturally also goes down. And this is a clear signal of competence. So if you think of a jaguar, of a cat, it's not going to be rushed. If it decides to run, it's because it's after a prey. If not, it's going to walk very, very slowly. And this is something that I think it's very easy to start practicing, just slowing down a little bit our pace when we walk. It can bring us huge changes in our charisma and in the competence that we're able to transmit to others. Then there is also the mastery of space, so mastery of time. So that's your time. You're not robbing time of anyone. You're taking your time to speak, to move, etc. And also your space. So how do you own your space? Again, think of a cat. It can be absolutely like, spread like butter, but it can also sit in the tiniest place, right? So mastery of space has a lot to do with when you enter a room, where do you sit? How much do you think you can move around you? So are your hand gestures very limited and constricted, or you feel comfortable using a little bit your personal space around you? This is very important to convey competence and personal power. And then lastly, it's about the mastery of noise. So you can, if you think about charismatic people, powerful people, normally you don't even know their name. So there is this question of, you need to be comfortable being discreet. You cannot try to have the be the center of attention. No, you need to be able to speak when you have something important to say, and understand that the more you speak, the more you dilute the value of your words. So if you can say it with fewer words, it's better for you in terms of demonstrating mastery of your competence and your power. But it doesn't mean that you have to be shy. So you're deciding that you don't speak, or you're deciding that you let the space to someone else. But you can also paralyze with the sound of your voice, like the jaguar. So just by roaring, it can paralyze the prey. So those are the elements that are associated with the jaguar, and I think we can have a whole other podcast just on this, because it comes also with verbal, paraverbal, visual. There are many things that come into play in how we transmit this, and I think this is something that can, as the word says, empower really people. When you start to master these elements, it can really change your life 180 degrees.
Yeah,
So
do
yeah.
that in another podcast. And I'm thinking now what you said about time. The thing that came to my mind is in group therapy. Many people struggle to take time and talk about themselves and their problems, and which is the exact opposite to other people who are the monopolizing clients, as Irvin Yalom says. So the monopolizing client will always talk about things that that they view as important, and they always kind of dominate, let's say, the group therapy session. But there are other people that feel very guilty when they take up time. Even they may talk for 2 minutes and then say, oh, I don't know, I don't want to talk too much, I don't want to monopolize the session, and everybody's like, no, but please talk. And you never talk, we rarely hear your voice.
Mm.
And it's interesting, how some people take over all the space and the time, and other people struggle to just borrow a tiny amount of time and space.
Yeah, and that's important, because you put a good nuance to what I said, because it's important to have mastery of time. I'm not saying that you should take all the time. So have mastery means you can take time, but you can also let others have that time. So thank you for making that distinction, because otherwise it might be misinterpreted as, oh, so I should talk super slowly, I should walk super slowly. No, I'm not saying that. But be comfortable in taking your time. That's the yeah. Mm.
Yeah, in taking your time in order to pass the message that you want to pass,
Exactly, exactly.
to communicate your message. Okay, I really like the jaguar as a metaphor. I don't know, it really resonated with me.
Mm.
And the, I can visualize the jaguar talking, walking slowly.
Yeah, that's what ancient wisdom has, that it resonates, like it's tied to very powerful archetypes. And I always like to preface this by saying that it's not my invention, because I would be like so arrogant if I took that on myself. This is a wisdom that is comes from their tradition, and I think that everything that comes from a tradition has foundation, which is something that I think we're kind of starting to lack in our modern world. So it's important to bring things back to foundations and to roots, I would say.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's continue this conversation with archetypes and how to develop charisma going forward. Okay, so thank you so much, Anna, for your for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Georgina. It was such a pleasure. It's the first time I do a podcast. I've been dreaming about doing a podcast for a long time. So this is an amazing experience for me. Yeah.
Okay, it was great for me as well. Really enjoyed it, and see you soon.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you all for watching.
So, bye everyone. We're going to have another podcast to explain and dive deeper into the notions of archetypes and how to develop mastery and charisma. Bye.